Stop the Week with Robert Robinson.
Hello. Our conversation this evening comes from Sarah Harrison, the author, Laurie Taylor, Professor of Sociology at York University, Edward Blishen, the writer, and Nicholas Tucker, lecturer in psychology at Sussex University. We have music from Dillie Keane of Fascinating Aida. They were going on, as you may have noted, about people's favourite awful advertisements in one of the Sunday papers, but it was before anyone can have heard Anthony Quayle advertising the Conservative Party just before the Archers the other day. You could actually hear him blinking with sincerity. And though I kept it on to get the full flavour of the effrontery, his child's eye view of recent political history became so intolerable, I nearly threw myself out of the car and let it drive on by itself. When I hear actors who fall into Time magazine's wonderfully subtle category of slightly famous trying to sell me wine gums or fly spray, it just strikes me as not very dignified. But when the same J. Arthur Charm School figure tries to tell me how I should vote, I really do feel he should climb back into his jockstrap and give us a bit of Shakespeare.
Even worse are those personalities who step off the APT or leap up from behind some Learjet and say, "Do you know me?" And they're selling plastic money. Have you said, just dreadful that, "Do you know me?" And they never say who they are, and you're tempted to hurl your onyx ashtray through the screen, aren't you, and say, "No, we don't, and we don't want to hear what you're selling."
And then there are those who obviously live on the best, and they have the best invariably, and are seen advertising the worst. I mean, famous actors who obviously never touch instant coffee, seen actually smelling with wonderful relish.
Sarah's fury in wanting to string the ashtray through the television, I think, is matched by my feeling when I see that Jimmy Tarbuck advertising microwave ovens on the side of every single London bus, you know, and you're feeling that you would love to see him impaled on a revolving turntable inside the thing with an apple in his mouth, between those teeth.
I noticed the other day on our station, it said, "I never thought I was the sort who won the premium bonds." Have you noticed that one?
Yes.
And underneath it says £11 million won every month by real people. Now, this is a rebuke to the rest of us who are unreal.
I must confess, having a rather sort of a pleasant cringe about the wonder of Woolies, which always suggests a kind of an angelic host of little hand-knitted Angora boleros, you know. But also, of course, obviously, it's the stereotypes we don't like, but haven't they got in an awful mess trying to get round the stereotypes? I mean, there used to be a time when they advertised, the perfect housewife was offered wonderful things to make her floor clean and so on, but now they are saying, in order to get round all that, they have plumbed new depths of patronage and condescension, the wonderful complete frozen menu, which will enable the housewife to get out and play squash, to go to the gym with her friends, you know, to walk her well-shampooed golden retriever along the riverbank. That really makes my gorge rise.
My current favourite nasty one is the mad French father who greets the news that his daughter's marrying an Englishman with sort of jaw-dropping dismay. Instead of being awfully glad that she isn't marrying a Frenchman with funny trousers, he ought to be grateful. And the father's barking madness is established beyond any kind of question when the Englishman, well, in all fairness, it has to be said the Englishman's a nutter too. He produces a couple of bottles of drink from the local offie, which he's apparently wrapped in a shoebox, or it looks like a shoebox to me, and the insane frog begins to gasp with delight, and as far as I can tell, offers to marry the young man himself. And if I were that girl, I'd make for the back door and...
What I find a bit puzzling about all this is that you all know so many. And I hate...
Why does that puzzle you?
Well, simply because I was
Don't
thinking...
get them at the theatre.
I mean, it's just evidence of a misspent youth on our part.
No, it's not. It's evidence of a misplaced middle age. Because when I was thinking about this, the adverts that really irritated me, I decided, were the ones I used to see as an adolescent on the tube. It's people like old Heathers, who recommended Robinson's barley water.
No, we all loved him.
And Mr. Barrett, who had this long talk about shoes in perfect sort of sincerity. sincerity.
People used to stop him
Then
in the
suddenly
street.
he'd say, walk the Barrett way. And it's these people that annoy me because...
It always made me feel that he must be knock-kneed or footed, and you'd better all walk that way ourselves.
The point I was making is that I simply don't believe advertisements, as I'm sure you don't. But as a sort of impressionable child, I actually believed old Hethers and Mr. Barrett really meant what they said.
You can't help thinking when you look at today's advertisements that somehow the people who are making them are so utterly pleased with themselves that they can no longer manage to get people like Barrett and Heathers in the same way, that there has to be some sort of truthfulness about the way they're approaching us. Well, the other week we were talking about the dreadful Sid campaign, and I just turned up something that Philip Norman was saying about when he was talking about watching advertisements now and being overcome by the sense that he can actually hear the self-satisfied giggling of the people who made them behind the adverts. And he said, and so they all go straining on in their pink socks after lunch with their misfiring jokes and kindergarten puns, hopefully designed to conceal their inability to form a whole thought or even properly comprehend the product entrusted to them. I feel that's a reasonable indictment of current advertisers. They seem to lack the humour and almost, can you possibly have integrity, but something like integrity that they had before.
But the dreadful thing is, however precisely he puts it, it'll never go away. That's the dreadful thing.
Yes, but what I've noticed is that this kind of madness sinks right down to the most modest advertisements in the local paper. I noticed in our local paper today an advertisement with the usual plum pudding and holly, and it said, have a Christmas clear-out with Elstree and Radlett mini-skip hire. And the next step will be for that to appear in our local paper in French next year, or Italian. Which
Yes, I must say about the very simple ones. I was in one of those big freezer centres recently where you can buy sort of 100 frozen chicken drumsticks, and they were trying to persuade you to buy just such a jumbo bag of something. And over the freezer, with just an arrow pointing down, was saying, if you buy these, the implication was you would get, and all they had written was free Ross Gatto, at the bottom of which someone had written, Ross Gatto is innocent.
The one I think to is on a theatre programme, local theatre programme, and there's an advertisement for a fish restaurant, and underneath the name they'd written, this is the place, Plaice. And the terrible thing is that once heard, you can't forget. It's like that awful phrase about shoes. They're well worn, but they've worn well. That sort of ran around my mind all the time, on the tube.
Yeah, no one, we're harking back a little now, but the OXO advertisement of Time, yes, well, not long gone, but medium gone. Philip, it wasn't the young lady who was advertising the OXO, it was the terrible husband, man in early middle age who looked as though he was dying very, very slowly from a surfeit of spam fritters. But it was Peter Black who said the best thing about Philip. He said that he described him as a man with a high tolerance to twice-cooked food.
I love the fascination of advertising. When these products arrive, though, is the fact that they can find space, I think they call it in the advertising world, for a new product. They think there is room to introduce a new one. And I think the one we're going to be bombarded with in the new year, I was reading in Campaign, is something called Detox, which is described as the odourless antiseptic cleaner that you can use near food.
A friend of mine was driving through Somerset recently, and right on the outskirts of this particular village or town was a great big sign, rather as though it was the name of the village, but it said potatoes, and underneath the same wag who said Ross Gatto is innocent had written twinned with pomme de terre. But I just give this a rerun, I've said it before, but what we're talking about is the higher balminess, aren't we? It runs through all these advertisements, and never more in evidence than in this ad, which I saw in America on American television. I've described it before, but I'm rerunning it here. Chap standing at a bus stop under an umbrella, lowers the umbrella and says earnestly, in weather like this, diarrhea's no fun. Well, it's book time again. It's book time again. The giving of books begins. And I say that, knowing that I'm not going to be contradicted. And you don't look as though you're going to do. Quite right, too. It's Christmas time and books are given. I was out bright and early after the one I was going to give myself for Christmas. I saw it in Christie's catalogue for this week. The first, the only, as far as I know, edition of that little symposium that some friends of Joyce put together in 1929 when the old artificer was still devilling away at Finnegan's Wake. A collection of pieces called Our Examination of His Factification of an Incamination of Work in Progress. It was inexpensive. I telephoned in a bid that I felt sure would get me the thing. And turning into the auction rooms to collect on Wednesday or Thursday of this week, I found I'd been bested by a geezer who bid 10 quid more. Well, pish and tush. I don't collect books, I only buy them to read. But yes, I was buying this in the slightly different way you do buy a book at present giving time, whether for yourself or someone else. It was a bit more than a book. I wanted the words inside it, but I wanted the thing as an object. I wanted to look at the 1929 wrapper, which had come apart according to the catalogue and been stuck inside. I wanted to think of holding in my hands a book that was talking about Finnegan's Wake, while that inspired cul-de-sac was still under construction. I thought of this book as a time machine, putting me directly in touch with something unknown called 1929. And I say all this because I think the book as gift is always a bit different from the book bought in the ordinary course of things. Do you get what I'm getting at here?
Oh, I think that's why book tokens are such an incredible cop-out, because you're just giving somebody money disguised as a coupon. If you're giving a book, you're giving them your estimation of the sort of taste they've got, and then, you stand to be counted. And if you gave the Confessions of a Window Cleaner to the wrong person, that'd be the sort of social slight that would never be forgotten for the rest of time. You often give a book to somebody for reasons very different from the fact they're going to read them. I mean,
I was slightly trying to get that point across, but you're doing it much
well.
better.
I'll just say this, that in many ways books are a part of people, and that if you've written a book, you give it to somebody, not with the idea that they're going to read it, because it's part of you.
Well, yes, but most of us haven't, you see. But, I mean, even when we do buy a book, we're giving a little bit of ourselves, I would say, and I would like thoroughly to agree with you about the book token, but I know Edward is shaking his head because he doesn't agree with either of us.
I think it's a complete mistake to regard a book token as a cop-out. I see the great pleasure that is given if you actually risk a judgment of taste and you give somebody a book, even if it's wrong. At least you've been trying, and that's very pleasant. But I do believe that some of the most memorable things I can remember being given book tokens, because what results from that is the pleasure of going into a bookshop, knowing that you have £10 or whatever it is, and that you're actually free to make some of the rashest and most foolish books I've ever bought come out of such a thing.
It's the word free, this idea that they're giving you this freedom. Because I have very rarely bought a book I liked with a book token. It seems to have a deadening effect on my powers of selection and discernment. Now, you see, there are two very precise reasons why this is. One is that they come in nice round figures, £5 or £10 or whatever, and books just aren't priced that way. You can't get change from them, so you always have to spend more.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, it smacks of books by the yard. You run along and buy yourself £5 of books, dear.
Nonsense.
Because it'll be
Oh,
good for
she's
you.
right,
It's
you know.
a deadening feeling.
Well, all I can say is that you all have a most appalling view of this, because, in fact, the pleasure, if
She's got you on the run, you know.
One of the nice things is, in fact, not having enough and having to supplement it, which makes the present even better, if you actually...
You're peddling very hard there, Edward.
No. I'm
Very
actually
good.
describing very innocently my own pleasure in all the defects that Sarah is talking about. It's these very defects in the book token that I love.
It's what you get at school, a book token. It's associated with, it's like a prize. And it really carries with it a recommendation that you should get something serious
Yes,
with it.
yes,
if you're
yes,
using
yes.
money,
What
then you can
rotten
buy
friends
ice
you have.
creams and chocolate and cheap, nasty books.
Right.
But to use a book token to buy a nasty, cheap book is simply not on. And therefore you carry it in as though the headmaster had given to you. Wherever it's come from, it carries that little pedagogic strain with it. Or if it's a very, very cheap thing, it's only mere an afterthought. It's hardly up from a present. No, I think that you should really try harder, because the delight comes from if you can manage to choose a book for somebody and they can be pleased with a book that they receive from you, because that suggests at least that you have really tried and you've managed to get it right. By getting it right, that is not carrying with that book too much of your own taste, not for example, sending a book of poetry. That could be the worst thing to send to anybody else, because that proclaims your own taste. That is imbalanced. But there is a perfect choice, one which catches the interest of the other person, at the same time displays the amount of thought that has gone into your
That's
catching.
it. You see, I so much agree with you. You see, sometimes we might feel we're buying presents, but particularly books, in the way of entering the shop as proxy for the person we're giving the present to, the book to, I should say. But we are not. We're doing just what you say. You shouldn't overload it with your own thumbprint or impress, but that's got to be there. The person must receive it without feeling that it's exactly to his taste. It's in the hope that it's both of your tastes, and it's something of you. Something of you is carried
Exactly,
in it.
but I think that's what Edward is saying in a sense. You see, he is, as we all know, an extraordinarily well-read man. He lives with books. He eats No, Edward, it's got a lot to do with it. Because, you see, if somebody gives you a book, there's every chance you've either read it or you don't like the author. Now, if someone like you gives one of us a book, there's every chance you're going to produce somebody that we haven't actually heard of or haven't liked, and will suddenly open up a whole vista of interesting books to read.
Nick,
and that's why it wouldn't be a cop-out for you, but it would be a cop-out for other people.
I've never felt more obliged to throw a panegyric back where it came from. Really, honestly, Nick, if that's me, I go. I leave at once. I leave the room. That is me. If that is me. No, honestly, it's got nothing to do with anything like that. It is, what I find quite extraordinary is that the quite civilised room full of people don't recognise the pleasure that a book token actually positively gives. I mean, the whole notion of it being some kind of insipid gift, a failure, a refusal actually to choose an actual gift, a precise gift, or some kind of pedagogic. What school you went to, Laurie?
The last word I have on book tokens is that the aunt of a friend of mine actually used to send her book tokens, and then, as if that wasn't deadening enough, specify what they were to be spent on by saying Book of Common Prayer and what Katie did, please.
To bring the thing round a little tiny bit of a circle, because I should have thought that Edward's thesis that you can with book tokens buy any book you like really contradicts the advertising for book tokens, which I have here in front of me, where there are these two delightful middle-class children locked into books as they lie on the floor, and the heading says, think of it as an open door, a door into a room full of the world's most brilliant people, some of whom will become lifelong friends. We refer, of course, to the world of books. Now, if that isn't worthiness, as it were, if that doesn't say book tokens are for good books, nothing.
First, Laurie, this evening, I am destroyed by a panegyric from Nick, and now book tokens are an excellent issue to destroy by a panegyric from themselves.
Well, here's another bit of destruction, Edward.
You've got to take it on the chin, Edward.
Books in this respect are like, would you buy pictures for somebody, a picture for somebody, really, a painting of any kind? It does seem to me, on the whole, unless you know somebody very, very well, and therefore are pretty sure of the book you're buying, or unless you know somebody rather badly and want actually to pass on a message which consists in your getting it interestingly wrong, and those are perfectly satisfactory ways of making gifts. The real argument for the book, to the poor old book token, which isn't a pretentious thing at all, the real argument for it is that you're actually saying to your recipient, you know what you would like, here is the opportunity to get it. And that's what
I can remember as a child now the disappointment of the book token. I can remember the envelope arriving and saying, oh, it's Uncle Harold, he sends us the book token. And we knew, in fact, that Uncle Harold used to send one book token, which had to be divided between everybody. It was for £20, I think, because Uncle Harold was quite rich. And I got £10 as the oldest member of the family. And then my sisters, the next, got 10. I got 10, she got 5, and then the other two children got £2.50 each, which I remember my sister and I worked out for myself, and I wondered later if there was any relative change in the literacy within our family as the result of apportioning the book token in this way.
I cannot permit Edward yet again to return to the subject he stamped into the ground, namely the book token, or all the rest of us. I think it's gone, we've had it, it's flown away on the breeze. What we're now going to have is a delicious song from Dillie, which introduces us in a way to our next topic, and she calls it Shattered Illusions.
I fell for a man at a party, a Hyperion. His godlike beauty easily met each criterion. 5'10" and debonair, emerald eyes and thick black hair. But when we got closer, was he perfect? No, sir. His nice white teeth came out at night, and his lashes were tinted all right. Oh, my shattered illusions. I got a shock when I saw him cleanse each bright green contact lens. Oh, my poor confusion. But the thing that caused the final rift was when his toupee started to drift and his shoes had 3-inch lifts. Oh, my shattered illusions. So I dropped him quick, and then I met a rugger type. He looked like Desperate Dan, but I couldn't gripe. Rippling muscles, pints of beer, and a cauliflower ear. But when we got closer, was he perfect? No, sir. His flat was painted in palest pink. There were creams and unguents around his sink. Oh, my shattered illusion. His great big hands felt like wet spaghetti. He lay on the couch and said, "Call me Betty," and then showed me his contusions. He appeared in a nylon negligee and handed me a whip and said, "Have your way." Then asked if he could borrow my lingerie. Oh, my shattered illusions. But now I really think I've met the ideal guy. Can't find a single fault, no matter how I try. Though no Adonis, he's the cream. He is every mother's dream. But will I let him get closer? What do you think? Oh, no, sir. He thinks I'm lovely, but entre nous, my lashes and nails are stuck on with glue. Oh, his shattered illusions. I've had a little tuck here and a little tuck there, and I wasn't born with auburn hair. Oh, his poor delusions. My original nose was much, much bigger because it would simply make him snigger. It's to silicone I owe my shapely figure. Oh, his shattered illusions. But I'll keep mum because you see his bride is what I long to be. But God help us if the children look like me. Oh, his shattered illusions.
Well did Dillie sing of shattered illusions, because I'll take that topic further. I'd never heard my man in East Molesey so passionate. A damnable crime, he called it. Spiritual vandalism was his very phrase. What was that, I queried. Why, the priest in America who announced to the children in his congregation that there was no such person as Father Christmas. You really think it matters, said I. But it was plain the poor old thing meant it. Said he'd never forgotten a moment in his own childhood. He was living a little further east in those days, Norbiton, or it might have been Berrylands, when his snotty-nosed chums told him Father Christmas was a mere fiction. He was horrified. Well, it's all about leaving people's illusions intact, isn't it? Or do you do them a favour by pulling the rose-coloured spectacles from their noses?
The problem with this particular illusion, I think it's a different kind of illusion from some others, because this is an illusion which is almost like, which is a piece of, it's a collective agreement among parents to deceive their children. And whereas many illusions are much more private, I mean, are restricted within the family or are set down in one story, and therefore they can never be properly shattered. I mean, like stories about Cinderella or Jack and the Beanstalk are never said to be untrue and then simply disappear, because they don't depend upon the idea there's been a conspiracy which has been trying to make them true. Father Christmas depends upon the discovery that there has been a conspiracy by all fathers and mothers against children, and that seems to me to make it an especially disturbing illusion.
No, I absolutely disagree. I thought I was going to agree with you when you started on that, because I don't agree. I think it's special because it's a collusion between the parents and the children.
Yeah.
I think, in fact, that the family all... No, I think there comes a point where the parents know that the children suspect, and I think it's all there. And what is brutal and somehow wrong and insensitive about coming out, as this gentleman did, and saying in front of lots of people, is that he's broken that sort of tacit, that pact, that very delicate call which covers this whole thing. And I think that's what's wrong about it.
Right.
I think everybody colludes.
Yes, indeed, Sarah is absolutely right. It is something that, in fact, a child, probably almost a child's first diplomatic act is to know when to admit to his parents that he actually knows, or he or she knows, that there is no Father Christmas. That is a piece of growing up, actually. And what they did was to interfere, what this chap did was to interfere with that very important act of maturing.
Yes, but I think it's even more subtle than that, Edward, that children are very good at both believing and not believing, and they can live in a double world. And I think we can all probably remember the time we were told that Father Christmas didn't exist. Now, I'm fairly sure that wasn't the first time we heard it. That I imagine that all your life you're surrounded by worldly wise kids in the playground telling you Father Christmas doesn't exist, or the playgroup or something. It's only when you're ready to hear it that it actually ceases to be illusion. Up to that point, it doesn't matter what people say. You so want him to exist, he's going to exist, whatever the world.
It is a process of conniving, or collusion is a much better word, as Sarah used, between the parent and the child. The child simply agrees, and so does the parent in a way, to suspend their disbelief as they do when they're reading about Noddy in Toyland, or do they believe in fairies? And what it is an agreement to do is to say, wouldn't it be nice if Father Christmas did exist? And that's what children join in pretending.
But you're making it all too... I think it's much more sinister than that, you see, because, of course, Sarah's absolutely right to say there's a point in which children can be said to be going along, to be training their parents. It's the old story of rats and psychologists, that you suddenly find that really the rats are running the psychologists. Of course. Absolutely true, because, I mean, if they go along with their parents, presents will be bigger and better, and, in fact, parents will be kept happy.
I don't think it's like that at all.
That's perfect. That game point does come. But what I just want to come back to, because I don't think anybody has said... The first point that I made was that it is a very, very nasty trick to play, insofar as it represents parents against children in the first stages. It is something that all parents know and children don't know. And the sight of small children going up to be deceived routinely in places like Selfridge or wherever, and to see the faces of those children, doesn't seem to me to be a pleasant sight. Because what I'm saying is that when they find out, the carpet is pulled away. There is nothing left. Father Christmas does not exist. No. And that is not the same as other myths and other stories and other fantasies where there is a clinging residue.
I will go so far with you as to say there was a time, I think, when belief itself was, irrespective of the end product of the belief, was considered to be a good thing, absolutely a good thing in itself, that it was a far superior course of action to believe things without any evidence for them than to put them to the question. And I have a feeling there used to be families, I'm thinking when I was a child, who operated on this principle, and instead of being appalled at the credulity of their children in accepting that there was a figment as a fact, accepting Father Christmas, they seem to see this as reassuring evidence of meekness and obedience. To defer to a figment on parental authority was more or less required in certain childhoods, in certain households in my childhood. However, I don't believe it's like that anymore.
I think it's only in a very tiny minority that parents actually ever have used it as a kind of sinister thing, an attempt actually to increase the docility of their children. What is interesting, I find, what I find is very interesting is that very few of us can remember the moment when what ought to be remembered as a great moment of disillusionment occurred. There's a kind of sliding between one thing and another. It's between one kind of...
I've got to contradict Edward, because you can't say that it's not used to produce docility, because what Father Christmas will bring and not bring, what the bogeyman will do and not do, is a part of childhood. If you don't do this, Father Christmas won't do it. I should imagine in practically every home in this country, at some stage as one moves towards Christmas, say, well, if you're not good, Father Christmas won't do that. I think this is an appalling figure. It's a disciplinary figure. And it is interesting that something like one-third of children who write to Father Christmas, their letters actually refer to Father Christmas as though Father Christmas was God. I mean, that is, in fact, the status which is accorded to Father Christmas by very young children who write those letters. They believe that God and Father Christmas are interchangeable. When you talk about a patriarchal figure, someone who lays down what is right and what is wrong, you've got to get back to childhood a little bit. Stop being so clever about it.
I don't think this will wash for a minute.
I'll say 3 or 4 years old, in fact, it's different.
I will just say one thing. I refute it thus, part of it thus. Father Christmas has never done anything but good. When we have the figure of God, we have punishment associated with reward. Quite wrongly, no doubt, but that is the way certain sects or religions treat it. With Father Christmas, he always bears gifts. So your theory doesn't hold.
Laurie is flying a kite pretty high. I mean...
think he means it.
I'm afraid he's wrong. That there's certainly a case for saying that parents who persistently bamboozle their children from a whole range of things, from Father Christmas to children being born under gooseberry bush, that is, of course, sinister. But the whole point, Laurie, is that when you find that Father Christmas doesn't exist, you're not disillusioned, you're re-illusioned, because who comes instead? Who gives you those presents? Your parents. Suddenly your parents seem very, very much nicer than they ever seemed before. It's not a losing something, it's a gaining a new manifestation of your parents' love and concern.
Yes. It's the spirit of Christmas sort of thing, isn't it? And if I may just draw an analogy between this and theatrical illusion, when an actor corpses on stage and giggles, now the audience knows that what they see as an illusion, and the actors know too. Again, both lots are colluding. But when an actor corpses, it's not that we can't sympathise with him, but that when he does it, he's broken the code of silence. He's rumbled the whole thing. He's shown it up for the sham it is. And this is why you mustn't just suddenly come out with it and tell the world at large that it's a sham.
Well, the whole thing is a charming fiction. I took my grandson... of course it is, Laurie. Please,
so.
Well, I took my grandchild to a pantomime for the first time. And there, in fact, are children, on the whole, who most of them have probably moved out of the field of utter credulity, but they still belong to the period of childhood, which I do remember quite very well, Laurie, when, in fact, credulity itself is a pleasure, a great pleasure. And the whole of a good pantomime operates on the notion that children are not quite sure whether, in fact, the villain has gone out. Whether, you know, the famous villain's cry in the middle of a pantomime, which of you had an ice cream in the interval? I've something to tell you. I poisoned the ice cream.
That's exactly my point. But you see, they go on, and when we go to the theatre, we never are quite sure to this day, but we are absolutely sure about Father Christmas. That is why he's completely different from all those other things.
I think it's exactly as much a story or a fiction or a pretend as a pantomime or a play or anything. I think anyone who was po-faced enough, as this priest was, actually to point out to a child that it was untrue, would have the children blushing up and edging away embarrassedly because he was telling them nothing that they didn't know.
What I hope the priest was doing was to undermine... I mean, when I talk about him as a rather sinister figure, I think that it's really... that Father Christmas has become a way. You needed this figure to be able to endorse materialism. You needed sort of some tradition... No, but just listen for a second, because you had to have... You didn't want a saint... You didn't want anything particularly religious, but you had to have some sort of icon which managed to combine the notion of tradition with the notion of spending money. Father Christmas does that perfectly. Here is this traditional figure, as it were, who is sanctioned by some sort of vague history, who stands there, and what does he do? He says, buy presents. Go out and buy them on my behalf, buy them in my name, and come back.
Let me say this to you. Not a single word that you have just said runs counter to the Father Christmas story, and yet we all know what you've just said is balmy.
Yes, quite. I think the reason is...
Don't just say words like balmy.
Well, I just want to define my position. I want to say
this.
this, and since I'm the chairman, I can shout old Nick now for a couple of seconds. It was all invented by Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens invented both Christmas and Father Christmas in the form in which... Okay,
Washington Irving.
That's an argument for Nick. We'll have that argument
Washington Irving in 1809.
Yes, and I will just say this, that he had nothing but the idea of a generally diffused benevolence, entirely unconnected with materialism as we know it in Selfridge's grotto.
What's the argument? What a ridiculous argument to say that, in fact, I'm talking about the contemporary Father Christmas and what he stands for. I mean, you are producing some sort of version and saying that this didn't stand for materialism.
But you're talking about it as though it's well-rooted in a malevolent past, and I'm suggesting otherwise.
What we're talking about, Laurie, is children's illusions.
You shouldn't have talked about... I knew passions would run high.
The whole point of being a child is that you live in a world of almost total illusion, that you don't know that your teachers get paid, for example. You think, on the whole, they teach because they like you. You think bus drivers drive buses because it's the thing they actually want to do.
You're able to talk about the quality of the illusion.
I should just like to say this, and I don't mean to refer it specifically to the priest who started this terrible argument, but I don't know if the cap fits. People who specialise in disillusioning others are probably people who know in their hearts how credulous they are themselves.
Sarah Harrison, Edward Blishen, Nicholas Tucker and Professor Laurie Taylor were stopping the week with Robert Robinson. Dillie Keane provided the musical interlude and the programme was produced by Michael Ember.